The rope burned against Aria's throat as she struggled against the wooden post, her wrists bound so tightly behind her that the coarse hemp had cut into her skin. Beside her, her younger brother Marcus fought against his own restraints, his 17-year-old frame trembling with a mixture of fear and rage that made his wolf stir dangerously close to the surface. "Please," Aria gasped, her voice hoarse from screaming. "We haven't done anything wrong. We're loyal to the pack." Elder Thorne stepped forward, his weathered face twisted with righteous fury. At 63, he was the oldest member of the Shadowmere Pack's council, and his word carried the weight of decades of tradition and unwavering adherence to pack law. "Loyalty," he spat, his grey eyes blazing with contempt. "You call it loyalty to consort with forbidden magic? To delve into secrets that were buried for good reason?" The gathered pack members murmured their agreement, their faces a sea of fear and condemnation. Aria could see neighbors who had known her since childhood, people who had shared meals at her family's table, now looking at her as if she were a disease that needed to be purged. "We were only trying to help," Marcus shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "The sickness that's been spreading through the pack, we found a way to cure it." "Silence," Elder Thorne roared, raising his gnarled hand. "Your so-called cure comes from blood magic, from the darkest practices our ancestors fought to eliminate. You have brought shame upon the Shadowmere name." Aria's heart pounded as she remembered the events that had led them to this moment. 3 weeks ago, a mysterious illness had begun affecting pack members, a wasting disease that seemed to drain the life force from werewolves, leaving them weak and unable to shift. The pack's healers had been baffled, their traditional remedies proving useless against the spreading plague. Desperate to help her people, Aria had turned to the forbidden archives hidden beneath the pack house, ancient texts that detailed magical practices banned by the Werewolf Council centuries ago. What she had discovered there had both thrilled and terrified her. A cure for the wasting disease, but one that required knowledge of blood magic and lunar rituals that had been deemed too dangerous for common use. "The ritual worked," Aria pleaded, trying to make the council understand. "We saved 12 pack members. They're healthy now, stronger than they've been in months." "At what cost?" Elder Thorne demanded. "You've opened a door that should have remained sealed forever. Blood magic corrupts everything it touches. Those you think you've saved are now tainted, marked by darkness that will spread like a cancer through our pack." "That's not true!" Marcus struggled against his bonds, his wolf's golden eyes flashing in his human face. "We followed the rituals exactly as they were written. We took every precaution. There are no precautions against evil." Another council member, Elder Blackwood, stepped forward. "The old ways were forbidden for good reason. Our ancestors learned that blood magic always demands a price, and that price is always higher than anyone expects to pay." Aria felt tears streaming down her face as she looked out at the crowd. Among the sea of condemning faces, she saw the 12 pack members she and Marcus had healed. They stood silent, their eyes downcast, unable or unwilling to speak in defense of the siblings who had saved their lives. "Where is Alpha Garrett?" Aria called out desperately. "He should be here. He should have a say in our punishment." Elder Thorne's expression grew even darker. "Alpha Garrett is indisposed. The council has voted, and the sentence is death by hanging. You will serve as an example to any others who might be tempted to dabble in forbidden arts." The crowd parted as 2 large pack members approached with nooses. Aria recognized them. Thomas Ironwood and Samuel Blackstone, both warriors she had grown up with, both now avoiding her eyes as they prepared to carry out the council's sentence. "This is wrong!" Marcus shouted, his voice carrying across the clearing. "We're being executed for saving lives. How is that justice?" "Justice is protecting the pack from corruption," Elder Thorne replied coldly. "Your intentions may have been good, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions." As Thomas placed the noose around Aria's neck, she closed her eyes and tried to find some measure of peace. She and Marcus had known the risks when they chose to delve into the forbidden archives. They had weighed the potential consequences against the certainty that pack members would die without intervention. "I'm sorry, Marcus," she whispered to her brother. "I should never have involved you in this." "Don't apologize," Marcus replied fiercely. "We did the right thing. If we have to die for it, at least we die knowing we saved innocent lives." Elder Thorne raised his hand, preparing to give the signal that would end their lives. "By the authority vested in me by the Shadowmere Pack Council, I sentence you both to death for the practice of forbidden blood magic and the corruption of pack members. May the Moon Goddess have mercy on your soul." The crowd held its collective breath as Thorne's hand began to fall. Aria braced herself for the end, her last thought a prayer that the pack would eventually understand that she and Marcus had acted out of love, not malice. But the signal never came. A thunderous howl echoed across the clearing, so powerful and commanding that every werewolf present felt it in their bones. The sound carried the unmistakable authority of an alpha, but not just any alpha. This was the howl of the Alpha King himself. The crowd turned as one toward the forest edge, where a massive black wolf emerged from the shadows. Even in wolf form, there was no mistaking the regal bearing and overwhelming presence of Kieran Nightshade, the Alpha King who ruled over all werewolf packs in the Northern Territories. Behind him came his elite guard, 12 of the most powerful werewolves in existence, their eyes glowing with barely contained power as they surveyed the scene before them. The Alpha King shifted to his human form in a display of fluid grace that spoke of centuries of experience. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a presence that commanded instant respect. His black hair was streaked with silver, and his ice-blue eyes held the wisdom and authority of someone who had ruled for over 300 years. Elder Thorne, the Alpha King's voice carried easily across the clearing, each word precise and weighted with power. "Explain to me why you are executing members of your pack without my knowledge or consent." Elder Thorne's face had gone pale, but he straightened his shoulders and met the Alpha King's gaze. "Your Majesty, these two have practiced forbidden blood magic. They have corrupted pack members and violated the most sacred laws of our people." "Have they?" The Alpha King's expression remained neutral, but there was something dangerous in his tone. "And what evidence do you have of this corruption?" "They admit to using blood magic rituals from the Forbidden Archives. I asked about corruption," the Alpha King interrupted smoothly. "Show me the corrupted pack members." Elder Thorne gestured toward the 12 werewolves who had been healed. "These individuals were subjected to blood magic rituals. They are tainted. Step forward," the Alpha King commanded the healed pack members. Reluctantly, the 12 approached. The Alpha King studied each of them carefully, his nostrils flaring as he scented them, his supernatural senses probing for any sign of dark magic or corruption. After several long minutes, he straightened. "I sense no corruption. These individuals are healthy, their wolf spirit strong and pure. If this is the result of blood magic, then perhaps our understanding of such practices is incomplete." "Your Majesty," Elder Blackwood spoke up nervously, "the old laws are clear. Blood magic is forbidden because my grandfather's generation feared what they didn't understand," the Alpha King said bluntly. "Tell me, Elder Thorne, how many pack members have died from this wasting disease?" 17, Your Majesty, but 17 deaths, and you would execute the only 2 individuals who found a way to stop the dying? The Alpha King's voice grew colder. "That seems counterproductive." Aria felt a surge of hope as she listened to the exchange. The Alpha King wasn't immediately condemning them. In fact, he seemed to be questioning the Council's decision. "Your Majesty," she called out, her voice stronger now. "May I speak?" The Alpha King's ice-blue eyes fixed on her, and she felt the full weight of his attention. "Speak. The blood magic we used, it's not the corrupting force the Council believes it to be. The rituals we performed were healing rituals, designed to strengthen the connection between a werewolf and their wolf spirit. We didn't summon demons or make pacts with dark entities. We simply used the life force already present in willing volunteers to heal those who were dying." "Willing volunteers?" the Alpha King asked. "Yes, Your Majesty. Marcus and I provided our own blood for the rituals. We risked our own life force to save our packmates. The Alpha King was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. And the results? Complete recovery in all 12 cases. The wasting disease was eliminated from their systems, and their wolf spirits are stronger than ever. Lies, Elder Thorne protested. Your Majesty, you cannot trust the words of those who traffic in dark magic. The Alpha King's gaze shifted to the Elder, and the temperature in the clearing seemed to drop several degrees. Are you suggesting that I am incapable of detecting lies, Elder Thorne? The Elder's face went white. No, Your Majesty, I would never. Good, because I can assure you that these two are telling the truth. The Alpha King turned back to Aria and Marcus. However, the fact remains that you violated pack law by accessing forbidden knowledge without permission. Aria's heart sank. Even if the Alpha King didn't believe they deserved death, they had still broken the law. Therefore, the Alpha King continued, I am invoking my right as Alpha King to claim jurisdiction over this case. These two will be released into my custody for further investigation and potential service to the Crown. Your Majesty, Elder Thorne protested. The Council has already voted. The Council, the Alpha King said with deadly quiet, serves at my pleasure. Your authority extends only as far as I allow it to extend, and I do not allow the execution of potentially valuable assets over superstition and fear. He gestured to his guards, who immediately moved to cut Aria and Marcus free from their restraints. As the ropes fell away, Aria rubbed her throat gratefully, hardly daring to believe that they were still alive. You will come with me, the Alpha King told them. Your knowledge of these healing rituals may prove valuable in dealing with similar outbreaks in other packs. As they prepared to leave with the Alpha King's entourage, Aria caught sight of Elder Thorne's face. The old man's expression was a mixture of fury and fear, and she realized that their troubles were far from over. They had been saved from execution, but they had also made powerful enemies within their own pack. Thank you, Your Majesty, Marcus said as they walked toward the forest edge. We owe you our lives. The Alpha King glanced at him, and for just a moment, Aria thought she saw something almost like amusement in those ice-blue eyes. You may find that debt more costly than you imagine, young wolf, but for now, you live. That will have to be enough. As they disappeared into the forest, leaving the stunned Shadowmere pack behind, Aria couldn't help but wonder what fate awaited them in the Alpha King's service. They had escaped death, but at what price? Only time would tell if their salvation would prove to be another form of imprisonment, or the beginning of something far greater than they had ever imagined. The royal stronghold of the Northern Territories rose from the mountainside like something out of legend, a massive fortress of black stone and gleaming metal that seemed to grow from the very bones of the earth. As their convoy approached the main gates, Aria felt her breath catch at the sheer scale of the structure. She had heard stories of the Alpha King's seat of power, but seeing it in person was overwhelming. Impressive, isn't it? The Alpha King rode beside them on a magnificent black stallion, his bearing as regal on horseback as it was on foot. My great-grandfather began construction 3 centuries ago. Each generation has added to it. Marcus, who had been unusually quiet during their 3-day journey, finally spoke up. Your Majesty, may I ask what you intend to do with us? The Alpha King's ice-blue eyes studied the young man thoughtfully. That depends entirely on what you prove yourselves capable of. Your knowledge of blood magic healing rituals is valuable, but knowledge without wisdom can be dangerous. We're not dangerous, Aria said quickly. We only want to help people. The road to catastrophe is paved with good intentions, the Alpha King replied, echoing Elder Thorne's earlier words, but without the condemnation. However, I'm willing to give you the opportunity to prove that your intentions can be matched with wisdom and restraint. As they passed through the massive gates, Aria was struck by the diversity of the people moving through the courtyard. She saw werewolves from dozens of different packs, their various regional differences evident in their clothing, bearing, and scent markers. There were also humans, servants, advisors, and what appeared to be scholars or mages. "Your Majesty," a tall woman with silver hair approached as they dismounted. "Welcome back. I trust your journey was enlightening." "Indeed it was, Lydia. These are the two I told you about, Aria and Marcus Shadowmere. They'll be staying in the East Wing while we evaluate their abilities." Lydia's sharp green eyes assessed the siblings with the efficiency of someone accustomed to sizing up newcomers quickly. "The rooms are prepared. Shall I arrange for them to meet with the Council of Mages? Tomorrow. Tonight they rest and recover from their ordeal." The Alpha King turned to Aria and Marcus. "Lydia Ravencrest is my chief advisor and the head of our magical research division. You'll be working closely with her." Lydia stepped forward, her expression softening slightly. "I've heard about your situation. What you accomplished with the healing rituals is remarkable, especially given your limited resources and training." You know about blood magic?" Marcus asked, surprised. "I know about many forms of magic that the general werewolf population considers forbidden," Lydia replied. "The Alpha King's court takes a more pragmatic approach to magical knowledge. We believe that understanding leads to better control than ignorance and fear." As they were led through the fortress corridors, Aria marveled at the artwork and architecture surrounding them. Tapestries depicting great battles and magical workings lined the walls, while enchanted torches provided light that never flickered or dimmed. "This is incredible," she breathed. "I've never seen anything like it." "The Royal Stronghold is home to the largest collection of magical knowledge in the werewolf territories," Lydia explained. "We have scholars from across the supernatural world working here, werewolves, witches, fae, and even a few vampires who have proven trustworthy." "Vampires?" Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "Knowledge recognizes no species boundaries," the Alpha King said from behind them. "Some of our most valuable research has come from collaboration between traditional enemies. When you're fighting diseases that threaten all supernatural beings, old prejudices become luxuries we can't afford." They were shown to adjoining rooms in the East Wing, each furnished with comfortable beds, writing desks, and bookshelves filled with texts on magical theory and practice. Aria's room had a large window overlooking the courtyard, and she could see the constant flow of activity even as evening approached. "Dinner is served in the Great Hall at sunset," Lydia informed them. "Tomorrow morning you'll begin your evaluation. Get some rest. You'll need it." After Lydia left, Aria and Marcus met in the corridor between their rooms. "Can you believe this is really happening?" Marcus whispered. 3 days ago we were about to be executed, and now we're guests in the Alpha King's fortress." "I'm not sure we're guests," Aria replied thoughtfully. "I think we're more like potential assets being evaluated for usefulness. Does it matter? We're alive, and we're somewhere that people actually value magical knowledge instead of fearing it." Aria nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that their situation was more complex than it appeared. The Alpha King had saved them, yes, but she sensed there were layers to his motivations that she didn't yet understand. That evening in the Great Hall, they were seated at a table with other newcomers and junior researchers. The hall itself was magnificent, a soaring space with vaulted ceilings and long tables that could accommodate hundreds of people. At the head of the hall, the Alpha King sat at the high table with his senior advisors and what appeared to be visiting dignitaries from other packs. "You're the blood magic healers, aren't you?" asked a young woman sitting across from them. She had the distinctive red hair and green eyes of the Celtic werewolf clans. "I'm Moira Blackthorne from the Highland Packs. I specialize in plant-based healing magic." "Word travels fast," Marcus observed. "Everything travels fast here," said a dark-skinned man beside Moira. "I'm David Stormwind, elemental magic researcher. The Alpha King's court is like a magical university. Everyone's working on different projects, but we all share information." "What kind of projects?" Aria asked, genuinely curious. "Disease research, magical artifact analysis, defensive enchantments for pack territories," Moira listed. I've been working on a project to develop magical crops that can grow in werewolf territory without being affected by lunar cycles. And I'm developing weather control techniques for agricultural purposes, David added. The Alpha King believes that magical innovation is key to ensuring the prosperity and security of all werewolf packs. As the evening progressed, Aria and Marcus learned more about the scope of the Alpha King's magical research programs. It was far more extensive and sophisticated than anything they had imagined possible. The royal stronghold wasn't just a seat of political power, it was a center of learning and innovation that attracted the brightest magical minds from across the supernatural world. "There's something you should know," Moira said quietly as the meal wound down. "Not everyone in the werewolf territories approves of what goes on here. There are traditionalist factions that consider the Alpha King's magical research programs to be dangerous departures from werewolf tradition. Like our pack council," Marcus said bitterly. "Exactly. And some of those factions have been growing bolder in their opposition. There have been incidents, research facilities attacked, scholars threatened, magical texts stolen or destroyed." "Is that why the Alpha King intervened in our case?" Aria asked. "To prevent the loss of potentially valuable knowledge?" "Partly," David replied, "but I think there's more to it than that. The Alpha King has been particularly interested in healing magic lately. There are rumors that something big is coming, some kind of threat that will require all the magical knowledge and power we can muster." Before Aria could ask what kind of threat, a commotion at the high table drew their attention. A messenger had arrived, and whatever news he brought had caused the Alpha King's expression to grow grim. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Alpha King's voice carried easily across the great hall, "I'm afraid I must cut this evening short. We have received urgent news that requires immediate attention." As the hall began to empty, Lydia appeared at their table. "Aria, Marcus, the Alpha King wants to see you in his private study. Now." They followed her through a maze of corridors to a smaller, more intimate chamber lined with books and magical artifacts. The Alpha King stood before a large map table, studying what appeared to be reports from various pack territories. "Your Majesty?" Aria said tentatively. He looked up, and she was struck by the weight of concern in his ice-blue eyes. "The news I just received changes everything. 3 more packs have reported outbreaks of the wasting disease, including 2 that are over 1,000 miles from your territory." "That's impossible," Marcus said. "Diseases don't spread that quickly over such distances, especially not among werewolves." "No, they don't," the Alpha King agreed grimly, "which means this isn't a natural disease. Someone or something is deliberately spreading it." Aria felt a chill run down her spine. "You think it's magical in origin?" "I'm certain of it. And that means your healing ritual isn't just valuable. It may be the only thing standing between the werewolf race and extinction." "Your Majesty," Lydia interjected, "if this is a coordinated magical attack, we need to identify the source and the perpetrators." "Agreed, which is why I'm accelerating your evaluation," the Alpha King told Aria and Marcus. "Tomorrow, you'll work with our best magical researchers to analyze your healing ritual and develop ways to mass-produce and distribute the cure. But we don't know if the ritual will work on other variants of the disease," Aria protested. "What we faced in our pack might be different from what's affecting the others. Then we'll need to adapt and improve the ritual. The alternative is watching pack after pack fall to this plague until there are no werewolves left to save." The gravity of the situation settled over them like a heavy blanket. What had started as a desperate attempt to save their own pack members had suddenly become a race to save their entire species. "There's something else," the Alpha King continued. "The timing of these outbreaks, combined with the attacks on magical research facilities, suggests that whoever is behind this knows about our work here. They're trying to prevent us from developing effective countermeasures." "So we're not just fighting a disease," Marcus said slowly. "We're fighting an enemy who wants werewolves to die." "Exactly. And that enemy has just made this personal." The Alpha King's expression hardened. "They tried to ensure your execution. knowing that your knowledge was crucial to stopping their plague. That tells me we're on the right track." As they left the Alpha King's study, Aria's mind raced with the implications of what they had learned. They had been saved from execution, only to find themselves at the center of a much larger and more dangerous conflict. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus asked as they walked back to their rooms. Aria thought about the 12 pack members they had saved, about the 17 who had died before they found the cure, and about the hundreds or thousands who might die if they failed to stop this magical plague. "I have to be ready," she said finally. "We all do. Because if we fail, there might not be any werewolves left to remember that we tried." The weight of that responsibility was almost crushing, but it was also strangely liberating. For the first time since their ordeal began, Aria felt like she truly understood her purpose. They weren't just healers anymore. They were soldiers in a war for the survival of their species. And tomorrow, that war would begin in earnest. The magical research laboratory in the Royal Stronghold's lower levels was unlike anything Aria had ever imagined. Crystalline formations grew from the walls, pulsing with soft light that responded to magical energy. Enchanted instruments hummed quietly as they analyzed samples, while floating orbs of light provided illumination that could be adjusted with a thought. "This is where we'll be working," Dr. Elena Voss explained as she led Aria and Marcus through the facility. The vampire scholar was ancient even by her species' standards, with silver-white hair and eyes that held the wisdom of centuries. "We have the most advanced magical analysis equipment in the known world. It's incredible," Marcus breathed, watching as a complex runic array automatically adjusted itself to accommodate a new sample. "How long did it take to build all this?" "About 200 years, with contributions from every major magical tradition," Elena replied. The Alpha King's predecessors understood that knowledge sharing was essential for advancement. Aria approached one of the analysis stations, where samples of blood from the healed Shadowmere pack members were already being examined. "What have you found so far?" "Fascinating results," Elena said, pulling up a three-dimensional magical display that showed the cellular structure of the blood samples. "The healing ritual you performed didn't just cure the disease. It fundamentally strengthened the connection between the human and wolf aspects of their nature." "Is that significant?" Marcus asked. "Extremely. The wasting disease appears to work by severing that connection gradually, weakening both aspects until the victim can no longer maintain their werewolf nature. Your ritual essentially rebuilt those connections stronger than they were originally." Dr. Thaddeus Grimm, a werewolf mage from the Eastern Territories, looked up from his own analysis station. "We've been examining the disease samples from the other affected packs. The magical signature is consistent across all locations, confirming that this is indeed a coordinated attack." "Have you identified the source?" Aria asked. "Not yet, but we're getting closer. The magic used is sophisticated, a combination of blood magic, necromancy, and something else we haven't been able to identify." "Something else?" Marcus moved closer to examine Grimm's displays. "The unknown component appears to be the key to the disease's virulence and spread pattern. It's unlike anything in our databases." Elena gestured for them to join her at a larger analysis station. "This is why your healing ritual is so important. We need to understand exactly how it works, so we can develop a standardized treatment that can be administered by healers who don't have your specific knowledge." For the next several hours, Aria and Marcus worked with the research team to break down every aspect of their healing ritual. They demonstrated the precise hand movements, the specific incantations, and the mental focus required to channel their life force into the healing energy. "The blood component is crucial," Aria explained as she performed a modified version of the ritual on a test sample. "But it's not just any blood. It has to be freely given by someone with a strong emotional connection to the patient. That explains why the ritual worked so well for your pack members," Dr. Grimm observed. "You had grown up with them, cared about them personally." "But it also limits the scalability of the treatment," Elena noted with concern. "We can't expect every healer to have personal connections with every patient." Maybe we don't need personal connections, Marcus suggested. What if we could create a way to artificially strengthen the emotional component? How? Aria asked. Empathy magic. If we could temporarily link the healer's emotions to the patient's, create an artificial bond of caring. Elena's eyes lit up with interest. That's actually theoretically possible. We have empathy enhancement techniques that are used in diplomatic negotiations, with some modification. Before she could finish her thought, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red lights flashed as magical barriers automatically activated around the most sensitive research areas. What's happening? Aria shouted over the noise. Security breach, Dr. Grimm said grimly, checking a magical communication device. Multiple intruders in the upper levels. The facility is under attack. Through the laboratory's reinforced windows, they could see explosions of magical energy lighting up the fortress above them. The attack was clearly coordinated and powerful. Whoever was behind it had significant magical resources. We need to protect the research, Elena said, moving quickly to secure the most important samples and data. If they're targeting our disease research specifically. They are, came a voice from the laboratory entrance. The Alpha King strode in, his expression grim and his clothes singed from battle. This is a targeted strike designed to destroy our progress on the cure. How many attackers? Dr. Grimm asked. At least 50, possibly more. They're using some kind of concealment magic that makes it difficult to get an accurate count. The Alpha King moved to the main analysis station. What's the status of the research? We've made significant progress, Elena reported quickly. We understand how the healing ritual works and have identified potential ways to scale it up for mass treatment. Good. I need you to prepare everything for immediate evacuation. We're moving the entire research operation to the backup facility in the northern mountains. Your Majesty, Aria said, we could help with the defense. Our healing magic might be useful against whatever they're using to attack. The Alpha King studied her for a moment. You're not trained for magical combat. No, but we're trained to channel life force energy. If the attackers are using necromancy or death magic, she has a point, Marcus added. Life force energy is the natural counter to death magic. We might be able to disrupt their attacks. Another explosion rocked the facility, closer this time. Through the magical communication system, they could hear reports of the attackers pushing deeper into the fortress. Very well, the Alpha King decided, but you stay close to me and follow my orders exactly. Elena, begin the evacuation procedures. Grimm, help her secure the research data. As they made their way through the fortress corridors, Aria could see the extent of the attack. Magical fires burned in several sections, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of combat magic. Bodies of both defenders and attackers lay scattered throughout the passages. Who are they? Marcus asked as they passed a group of fallen attackers. The Alpha King knelt beside one of the bodies, examining the magical residue around it. Mercenaries by the look of it, but they're being directed by someone with significant knowledge of our defenses. An inside source? Aria suggested. Possibly, or someone who's been studying us for a very long time. They reached the main courtyard, where the battle was raging most fiercely. The attackers were a mix of rogue werewolves, dark mages, and creatures that Aria couldn't immediately identify. They fought with desperate intensity, as if they knew this was their only chance to accomplish their mission. There, the Alpha King pointed to a group of attackers who were advancing toward the main research tower. They're carrying some kind of magical device. If they reach the tower, the entire magical research archive could be destroyed. Aria finished, understanding the implications. We can't let that happen. Marcus, Aria, I need you to help me disrupt whatever magic they're using to power that device. As they moved closer to the advancing group, Aria could see the device more clearly. It was a crystalline structure about the size of a person, pulsing with dark energy that made her skin crawl. The magic emanating from it felt wrong, corrupted and hungry in a way that reminded her of the wasting disease. It's the same magical signature, she told the Alpha King. Whatever's powering that device is related to the plague. Then we know we're dealing with the right enemy, he replied grimly. "Can you counter it?" Aria looked at Marcus, seeing her own determination reflected in his eyes. "We can try." They positioned themselves on either side of the Alpha King, who began channeling his own considerable magical power. Aria and Marcus joined hands, feeling their life force energy begin to build and resonate between them. "Now," the Alpha King commanded. They released their combined power in a focused beam of pure life energy, aimed directly at the dark crystal device. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The device's dark aura flickered and began to fade, while the attackers carrying it stumbled and cried out in pain. But the victory was short-lived. The device suddenly flared with renewed power, and Aria felt a wave of corrupting energy wash over her. The sensation was like being touched by death itself. Cold, hungry, and absolutely malevolent. "It's adapting," Marcus gasped, his face pale with strain. "It's learning to counter our magic." "Then we need to try something different," the Alpha King said. "Aria, you said the healing ritual requires an emotional connection. What if we could create a connection to the device itself? Connect to that thing?" Aria shuddered at the thought. "It feels like pure evil. Not to embrace it, but to understand it. If we can comprehend how it works, we might be able to find a weakness." It was a dangerous gamble, but as more attackers poured into the courtyard, Aria realized they were running out of options. "All right, but if this goes wrong..." "It won't," the Alpha King said with quiet confidence. "I'll anchor you. No matter what you encounter in there, I'll pull you back." Aria took a deep breath and opened her magical senses, reaching out toward the dark device. The moment her consciousness touched it, she was overwhelmed by a flood of malevolent images and sensations. She saw the true scope of the enemy's plan, not just the destruction of werewolf packs, but the corruption of all supernatural beings. The wasting disease was only the beginning, a way to weaken their targets before the real attack began. But she also saw something else, the device's power source. It was drawing energy from a network of similar devices hidden throughout the werewolf territories, all connected to a central source that pulsed with ancient, terrible power. "I see it," she gasped, fighting against the device's attempts to corrupt her mind. "There's a whole network. This is just one node in a massive magical array." "Where's the center?" the Alpha King demanded. Aria pushed deeper into the device's consciousness, following the energy flows back to their source. What she found there made her blood run cold. "The Shadowlands," she whispered. "The center is in the Shadowlands, in the ruins of the old capital." The Alpha King's expression grew grim. The Shadowlands were a cursed region, where an ancient magical catastrophe had rendered the land uninhabitable. No one had ventured there in over a century. "That explains how they've remained hidden," he said, "and why their magic feels so wrong. They're drawing power from the cursed earth itself." Aria severed her connection to the device, gasping as she returned to her own consciousness. The effort had drained her considerably, but the information they had gained was invaluable. "We need to destroy the central source," Marcus said, understanding the implications immediately. "Yes," the Alpha King agreed. "But first, we need to survive this attack and get our research to safety. The cure is still our top priority." As if summoned by his words, reinforcements arrived, elite guards from the Alpha King's personal forces, their magical weapons blazing with silver fire. The tide of battle began to turn as the attackers found themselves outnumbered and outmatched. But Aria knew this was only the beginning. The enemy had revealed themselves, but they had also shown the true scope of their ambitions. The war for the survival of the supernatural world had begun in earnest, and somewhere in the cursed Shadowlands, an ancient evil was stirring, preparing to unleash horrors that would make the wasting disease seem like a minor inconvenience. The real battle was yet to come. 3 weeks after the attack on the royal stronghold, Aria stood at the edge of the Shadowlands, staring into a landscape that seemed to exist outside the natural order. The cursed territory stretched before them like a wound in the world, Twisted trees with bark that pulsed like diseased flesh, ground that shifted and moved as if it were alive, and a sky that remained perpetually overcast despite the clear weather surrounding the region. "Are you certain about this?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with apprehension. "The stories about this place—" "The stories are probably understated," the Alpha King replied grimly. He stood beside them in full battle gear, his elite guard arranged in a protective formation around their small expedition. "But we don't have a choice. The network of disease-spreading devices has activated 17 more nodes in the past week. If we don't stop the source, we'll lose everything." Dr. Elena Voss checked her magical detection equipment one final time. "The readings are off the charts. Whatever's in there is drawing power from the cursed earth itself, just as Aria saw in her vision." The expedition consisted of 12 members, the Alpha King and his 4 most trusted guards, Aria and Marcus, Elena, Dr. Grimm, 2 combat mages from the Royal Academy, and Lydia Ravencrest. Each member had been chosen for specific skills that would be essential for their mission. "Remember," Lydia addressed the group, "our primary objective is to locate and destroy the central power source. Secondary objectives include gathering intelligence about our enemies and, if possible, capturing one of their leaders for interrogation." "And if we encounter the source of the original curse?" asked Captain Steele, the Alpha King's head of security. "We avoid it if possible," the Alpha King replied. "The magical catastrophe that created the Shadowlands happened over a century ago, but the energies involved were so powerful that they're still active. We're not equipped to deal with that level of magical corruption." As they crossed the boundary into the cursed territory, Aria immediately felt the wrongness of the place seeping into her bones. The air itself seemed thick and oppressive, carrying whispers of ancient pain and malevolent intent. Her healing magic recoiled instinctively from the pervasive corruption. "Stay close together," Dr. Grimm warned, his magical sensors detecting multiple threats in the immediate area. "The curse affects more than just the landscape. There are creatures here that were once normal animals, transformed by prolonged exposure to corrupted magic. They had been traveling for less than an hour when they encountered their first challenge. A pack of shadow wolves emerged from the twisted undergrowth, creatures that had once been normal wolves but were now living embodiments of darkness and hunger. Their eyes glowed with malevolent intelligence, and their forms seemed to shift and blur as if they existed only partially in the physical world. "Defensive formation," Captain Steele commanded, drawing his silver-blessed sword. The battle was brief but intense. The shadow wolves attacked with supernatural speed and coordination, their claws and fangs capable of tearing through magical shields as easily as flesh. But the expedition members were among the most skilled fighters and mages in the werewolf territories, and they quickly adapted to their enemies' tactics. Aria found herself channeling her healing magic in reverse, using life force energy to disrupt the unnatural animation that gave the shadow wolves their power. It was exhausting work, but effective. The creatures dissolved into wisps of dark smoke when their animating force was severed. "Interesting technique," Elena observed as they regrouped after the fight. "You're essentially performing a form of magical exorcism." "It feels wrong," Aria admitted, wiping sweat from her brow. "Using healing magic to destroy rather than create. Sometimes destruction is necessary for healing," the Alpha King said quietly. "These creatures are abominations, kept in a state of suffering by the curse. Releasing them is a mercy." As they pushed deeper into the Shadowlands, the landscape became increasingly surreal and threatening. They passed through forests where the trees bore fruit that screamed when touched, crossed rivers that flowed uphill and reflected images of places that didn't exist, and navigated around areas where gravity seemed to work differently. "The curse is getting stronger, Doctor," Grimm reported, his instruments registering magical energies that exceeded their measurement capabilities. "We're approaching something significant." "There!" Lydia pointed ahead to where the twisted landscape gave way to the ruins of what had once been a great city, the old capital of the Northern Territories. The ruins were a testament to the magical catastrophe that had created the Shadowlands. Buildings twisted into impossible shapes, their stone and metal fused into organic-looking growths that pulsed with dark energy. Streets had become canyons filled with shadows that moved independently of any light source. According to the historical records, Elena said, consulting an ancient map, the royal palace should be at the center of the city. If our enemies are using the curse as a power source, that's where they would establish their base. The journey through the ruined city was a nightmare of constant vigilance and supernatural threats. They encountered more shadow creatures, areas where the very air was toxic with corrupted magic, and architectural features that seemed designed to trap and confuse intruders. But they also began to see signs of recent habitation, paths cleared through the rubble, magical wards that were clearly of modern construction, and the lingering scent markers of werewolves who had passed through recently. "We're close," Marcus said, his enhanced senses picking up traces of the same magical signature they had detected in the disease-spreading devices. "Too close," Captain Steele muttered, pointing ahead to where figures in dark robes were moving through the ruins with obvious familiarity. The Alpha King signaled for the group to take cover behind a collapsed building. "Scouts, they know we're here. Should we take them?" asked one of the combat mages. "Not yet. We need to see where they go, learn more about their numbers and defenses." They followed the robed figures through the ruins, using concealment magic to mask their presence. The trail led them to the heart of the old city, where the royal palace had once stood. What they found there defied their worst expectations. The palace had been transformed into a massive ritual site. The original structure was barely recognizable. Its walls and towers twisted into a complex three-dimensional mandala that pulsed with dark energy. At the center of the construction, a pillar of pure shadow stretched from the ground to the perpetually overcast sky. "By the moon goddess," Lydia breathed, "they've turned the entire palace into a magical focus." "Look at the base of the shadow pillar," Elena said, adjusting her magical viewing equipment. "There are figures conducting some kind of ritual." Through the enhanced vision provided by Elena's equipment, they could see a group of robed figures arranged in a circle around the base of the shadow pillar. At their center stood a figure that made Aria's blood run cold. Tall and imposing, with features that had once been werewolf but were now twisted by dark magic into something barely recognizable as once human. "The Shadow Lord," the Alpha King said grimly. "I thought he was a legend." Who is the Shadow Lord?" Marcus asked. "According to the old stories, he was the Alpha King's brother during the time of the Great Catastrophe. He was experimenting with forbidden magic when something went wrong. The explosion that created the Shadowlands was supposedly his fault." "And he's been here all this time?" Aria asked, horrified. "Apparently so, and apparently he's learned to harness the curse that he created." As they watched, the ritual being conducted around the shadow pillar reached its climax. Dark energy erupted from the base of the pillar, spreading outward in waves that made the very air shimmer with malevolent power. "They're activating more nodes in the network," Dr. Grimm reported, his instruments detecting the energy surge. "This single ritual just activated dozens of new disease-spreading devices across the territories." "We have to stop them," Aria said, starting to rise from their concealment. "Wait," the Alpha King commanded. "We need a plan. A direct assault against that many enemies in their place of power would be suicide." "Then what do you suggest?" Marcus asked. The Alpha King studied the transformed palace for several long minutes, his tactical mind working through the possibilities. "The shadow pillar is the key. It's drawing power from the original curse and channeling it into their network. If we can disrupt it, the entire network collapses," Elena finished. "But how do we get close enough? There are at least 50 enemies down there, and they're protected by the most powerful dark magic I've ever encountered." "We don't get close," Aria said suddenly, understanding dawning in her mind. "We don't need to. Marcus and I can channel our healing magic from here." "The distance is too great," Dr. Grimm protested. and the interference from the curse would disrupt any magical working. Not if we use the curse itself as a conduit, Aria explained. The shadow pillar is connected to everything in the Shadowlands. If we can reverse the flow of energy, turn it from corruption to healing. You're talking about channeling enough life force energy to counter a century-old curse, Elena said, her voice filled with concern. The strain could kill you both. Better than letting the Shadow Lord complete his plan, Marcus said firmly. If he succeeds in spreading the wasting disease to every werewolf pack, our entire species will be extinct within a year. The Alpha King was quiet for a long moment, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. If you attempt this, you'll need anchors, people to help channel the energy and pull you back if you go too deep. We'll all anchor them, Lydia said immediately. Every person here will contribute whatever power they can. It's still incredibly dangerous, Elena warned. The amount of corrupted magic you'll be exposed to. We know the risks, Aria said quietly, but we also know what happens if we do nothing. As they prepared for the ritual that would either save the werewolf territories or destroy them all, Aria felt a strange sense of completion. Everything that had happened, their discovery of the healing magic, their near execution, their rescue by the Alpha King, had led to this moment. Are you ready? Marcus asked, taking her hand. No, Aria admitted, but let's do it anyway. They positioned themselves at the edge of their concealment, with the other expedition members forming a protective circle around them. The Alpha King placed his hands on their shoulders, his own considerable power ready to support and anchor them. Remember, he said quietly, you're not trying to destroy the curse. You're trying to transform it, turn corruption into healing, death into life. Aria and Marcus joined their power, feeling their life force energy begin to build and resonate. But instead of directing it outward, they sent it down into the cursed earth itself, following the network of dark energy back to its source. The moment their consciousness touched the shadow pillar, they were overwhelmed by a century of accumulated pain, rage, and malevolent intent. The curse fought against their intrusion, trying to corrupt and consume their life force. But they pressed on, supported by the combined will and power of their companions. Slowly, painfully, they began to reverse the flow of energy through the network, turning the Shadow Lord's own power against him. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The shadow pillar began to flicker and fade, while cries of alarm rose from the robed figures conducting their ritual. The Shadow Lord himself turned toward their hiding place, his twisted features contorted with rage and disbelief. Now, the Alpha King commanded, while they're disrupted. The final battle for the fate of the werewolf territories was about to begin. The shadow pillars flickering sent waves of disrupted energy throughout the transformed palace, causing the very foundations of the Shadow Lord's power to tremble. Aria felt the immense strain of channeling healing energy through a century of accumulated corruption, but she pressed on, knowing that this was their only chance to end the threat permanently. "They're coming," Captain Steele warned, as dozens of robed figures began moving toward their position with supernatural speed. The Alpha King's guards formed a defensive perimeter, their silver-blessed weapons gleaming in the unnatural twilight of the Shadowlands. But even as the first wave of enemies reached them, Aria could see that conventional combat would not be enough. The Shadow Lord's followers had been transformed by dark magic into something far beyond normal werewolves. "Aria, Marcus," Dr. Grimm called out urgently. "The energy feedback is increasing. If the pillar destabilizes completely while you're still connected to it, we'll be torn apart," Marcus finished grimly, but he didn't break his concentration. Through their shared connection, Aria could feel his determination matching her own. The battle raged around them as they continued their desperate work. Elena and the combat mages unleashed devastating spells that lit up the ruins with brilliant flashes of magical energy, while the Alpha King himself fought with the terrible grace of a predator born to rule. His claws, enhanced with royal magic, cut through the dark, twisted enemies like they were made of shadow and mist. But for every enemy that fell, two more seemed to take their place. The Shadow Lord had been building his forces for over a century, and his army of corrupted beings seemed endless. "The pillar is beginning to collapse," Lydia reported, her voice strained from the effort of maintaining the anchoring spell that kept Aria and Marcus connected to their own bodies. "But it's fighting back. The curse is trying to spread into you." Aria could feel it, tendrils of corruption reaching through their connection, trying to twist their healing magic into something dark and malevolent. The sensation was like ice water in her veins, carrying whispers of power and promises of dominion over life and death. "Don't listen to it," the Alpha King commanded, his voice cutting through the magical interference. "Remember who you are. Remember why you're here. Die." Through the chaos of battle and magical conflict, Aria heard something that made her heart soar, the sound of howls in the distance. Not the twisted cries of the Shadow Lord's creatures, but the pure, strong voices of werewolves answering their Alpha King's call. "Reinforcements," Captain Steele said with grim satisfaction. "The other packs received our signal." Indeed, werewolves from across the northern territories were pouring into the ruins, their combined howls creating a symphony of defiance that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cursed city. Aria saw the banners of a dozen different packs, warriors who had set aside old rivalries to stand together against the threat to their species. But the Shadow Lord was not finished. With a roar of rage that shattered stone and bent metal, he began to draw power directly from the curse itself, his form growing larger and more terrible as dark energy flowed into him. "He's trying to become one with the curse," Elena shouted over the noise of battle. "If he succeeds, he'll be virtually indestructible." "Then we stop him before he succeeds," Aria said, making a decision that she knew might cost her everything. "Marcus, I need you to maintain the connection to the pillar. I'm going after the Shadow Lord directly." "Aria, no," Marcus protested. "You can't face him alone." "I won't be alone," she replied, looking at the Alpha King. "Will I?" The Alpha King's ice-blue eyes met hers, and she saw understanding pass between them. "No," he said simply. "You won't." Breaking her connection to the Shadow Pillar was like tearing away part of her soul. But Aria forced herself to focus on the immediate threat. The Shadow Lord had grown to nearly twice his original size, his form wreathed in dark energy that made the air around him shimmer with malevolent power. His eyes, once werewolf gold, now burned with the cold fire of the curse itself. "You think you can stop me?" The Shadow Lord's voice boomed across the battlefield, distorted by the dark magic flowing through him. "I am the master of this realm. I have had a century to perfect my power, and we've had 3 weeks to perfect ours," Aria replied, stepping forward with the Alpha King beside her. "The difference is, our power comes from life, not death." The Shadow Lord laughed, a sound like breaking glass and screaming wind. "Life is temporary, child. Death is eternal, and I am death incarnate." He raised his hands, and waves of corrupting energy swept toward them. But Aria was ready. Drawing on everything she had learned about healing magic, she created a barrier of pure life force that met the dark energy head-on. The collision sent shockwaves through the ruins, but her barrier held. "Impossible!" the Shadow Lord snarled. "No healing magic is that powerful." "You're right," Aria admitted, feeling the strain of maintaining her defense. "Healing magic alone isn't enough. But healing magic, combined with the will to protect others, powered by the bonds between pack members who trust each other completely, that's something you can never understand." As if summoned by her words, she felt the presence of every werewolf on the battlefield flowing into her consciousness. Marcus, still maintaining his connection to the Shadow Pillar, was channeling not just his own power, but the combined life force of hundreds of pack members who had come to fight for their species' survival. The Alpha King stepped forward, his own royal magic blazing like silver fire. "You were my ancestor's brother once," he said to the Shadow Lord. "You were family, but you chose power over love, dominion over protection. That choice made you weak, not strong." "Weak?" the Shadow Lord raged, unleashing another wave of dark energy. "I have power beyond your comprehension." "You have the power of the curse," the Alpha King replied calmly, deflecting the attack with his own magic. "But the curse is just accumulated pain and suffering. It has no creativity, no growth, no hope. It can only destroy. It can never create anything new." Aria felt the truth of his words resonating through her magic. The Shadow Lord's power was immense, but it was also static, frozen in the moment of the original catastrophe, unable to adapt or evolve. Their healing magic, by contrast, was alive and growing, fed by the connections between the werewolves fighting around them. "Marcus," she called out, "can you redirect the pillar's energy?" "I'm trying," Marcus replied through gritted teeth. "But there's so much corruption." "Don't fight the corruption," Aria said, suddenly understanding what they needed to do. "Transform it. Use the healing ritual, but on the curse itself. Heal the original wound that created this place." It was an audacious plan, attempting to heal a magical catastrophe that had been festering for over a century. But as Marcus began to channel their healing magic into the very heart of the curse, Aria felt something shift in the fabric of reality around them. The shadow pillar began to change, its dark energy slowly lightening as the healing magic worked to transform corruption into renewal. The effect spread outward like ripples in a pond, touching every part of the cursed landscape. "No!" the Shadow Lord screamed, feeling his power source being transformed beneath him. "I will not be denied!" He launched himself at Aria with supernatural speed, his claws extended and wreathed in dark fire. But the Alpha King intercepted him, the two powerful beings colliding in an explosion of magical energy that lit up the entire battlefield. As they fought, Aria continued to pour her power into the healing ritual, supported by the combined will of hundreds of werewolves. She could feel the curse beginning to break down, its century of accumulated malevolence slowly dissolving under the persistent application of life force energy. But the effort was taking its toll. She could feel her own life force being drained, her consciousness beginning to fray at the edges. Through their connection, she sensed that Marcus was experiencing the same strain. They were giving everything they had to heal the ancient wound. "Hold on." The Alpha King's voice reached her through the chaos. "Just a little longer." The battle between the Alpha King and the Shadow Lord was titanic in scope, their clashing powers sending shockwaves through the ruins. But as the curse continued to weaken, the Shadow Lord's strength began to fade. His form, sustained by dark magic for over a century, started to flicker and become translucent. "This cannot be," he gasped, staggering as another wave of healing energy washed over him. "I am eternal, I am—" "You're tired," Aria said gently, approaching him as his monstrous form began to shrink back toward its original shape. "You've been carrying this pain for so long. Let us help you." For a moment, the Shadow Lord's burning eyes flickered with something that might have been recognition, or perhaps just exhaustion. I only wanted to protect them. My pack, my people. The magic was supposed to make us stronger." "I know," Aria said, extending her hand toward him. "But strength doesn't come from power over others. It comes from connections with others. Let us heal you too." The Shadow Lord looked at her outstretched hand, then at the Alpha King, who stood ready to resume their battle if necessary. Around them, the shadow pillar continued to transform, its dark energy becoming something clean and bright. "I'm so tired," the Shadow Lord whispered, his form now barely more substantial than mist. "So very tired." "Then rest," the Alpha King said, his voice gentle despite everything that had happened. "Rest, and let the healing begin." The Shadow Lord nodded once, then simply faded away. Not destroyed, but released, his consciousness finally able to let go of the pain and rage that had sustained him for over a century. With his departure, the last of the curse's power broke apart. The shadow pillar dissolved into motes of light that drifted upward like stars, while throughout the ruins, the twisted architecture began to straighten and heal. The perpetual overcast sky cleared for the first time in 100 years, revealing a brilliant full moon that bathed the healing landscape in silver light. Aria collapsed to her knees, utterly drained but triumphant. Around her, the werewolf reinforcements were cheering, their howls of victory echoing across the no longer cursed land. The wasting disease network had been destroyed, the ancient curse had been healed, and their species was safe. "Is it over?" Marcus asked weakly, finally releasing his connection to what had once been the shadow pillar. "It's over," the Alpha King confirmed, helping Aria to her feet. "The curse is broken, the disease network is destroyed, and the Shadow Lord is at peace." "What happens now?" Aria asked, looking around at the ruins that were slowly transforming back into something resembling a normal city. "Now, we rebuild," the Alpha King said simply. "The Northern Territories have their capital back, and we have healers who understand magic that was thought lost forever. The werewolf nation will be stronger than it has ever been." As they made their way out of the healing ruins, Aria reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. They had started as condemned criminals, facing execution for practicing forbidden magic. Now they were heroes who had saved their entire species. "Do you think we'll be able to go home?" Marcus asked as they walked. Aria looked at the Alpha King, who was deep in conversation with his advisors about the massive reconstruction effort that would be needed. She thought about the pack that had condemned them, the elders who had been so certain that their healing magic was evil. "I think we are home," she said finally. "Maybe not the home we were born to, but the home we've chosen. The home where our knowledge and abilities are valued, where we can help people without fear of persecution. The Royal Stronghold. The Royal Stronghold, the healing territories wherever we're needed. We're not just healers anymore, Marcus. We're part of something bigger. A new understanding of what werewolf society can become when it embraces knowledge instead of fearing it." As the sun rose over the healing Shadowlands, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Aria felt a deep sense of completion. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, not through violence or domination, but through healing and transformation. The forbidden knowledge that had nearly cost them their lives had instead saved their entire species. And in the process, they had learned that the most powerful magic of all was not the ability to control life and death, but the willingness to sacrifice everything for the people you love. The werewolf territories would never be the same, but then again, neither would they. And that, Aria thought as she watched the Alpha King's banner flying over the restored capital, was exactly as it should be. The age of fear and superstition was ending. The age of knowledge and healing had begun. And they had been privileged to help usher it in. The end. Important notice. This story is completely fictional and created for entertainment purposes only. All characters, events, situations, and circumstances are products of imagination and do not represent real people, living or dead, or real events. Any resemblance to actual persons or situations is purely coincidental. This epic fantasy story explores themes of knowledge versus fear, the power of healing over destruction, and how true strength comes from unity and sacrifice rather than individual power. Through the characters of Aria and Marcus, it shows how those who are persecuted for their knowledge can become the very saviors their society needs, and how understanding and compassion can triumph over